Get back, old man. This isn't some veterans club. You can't just wander in here waving your hat. The guard's voice sliced through the chatter of the queue. A few visitors turned, amused by the spectacle, a thin, bent figure clutching a worn cap like a ticket that no longer counted. Arthur Blythe didn't move. The guard's arm blocked his chest, but his gaze stayed level, steady as a man measuring a crosswind. A boy in a school group whispered that the old man was lost. A woman smiled politely, the kind of smile used for stray dogs. Arthur took one small step forward. The guard stiffened, hand on his radio. The scene gathered heat, the laughter, the muttering, the way people enjoy rules being enforced when it's not against them. He spoke only once, the words dry as paper. I'm not lost. Son, I've come home. The guard laughed, loud enough to carry. Home? This is the Royal Air Museum, not your care home. Arthur said nothing more. He adjusted the strap of a satchel, its leather worn soft, its clasp polished by time. A patch, once blue, still clung to the front. Squadron 9. The guard caught sight of it, frowned, and hesitated. He didn't know why the sight of that faded thread tightened his throat. From deeper inside the hall, a man in uniform looked up from a reception desk. A retired colonel, Martin Hale. He had spent 20 years keeping the museum's order and memory intact. Hale's eyes locked on the patch. His chair scraped back. Where did you get that insignia? Sir? Arthur turned, quiet and deliberate, as though answering an inspection. It's mine, always was. The crowd stilled. The guard, suddenly less sure of himself, lowered his arm but kept his stance. Hale came closer, studying the small details others missed, the steady hand that still saluted by instinct, the shoes polished without vanity, the quiet refusal to look smaller than he was. The colonel gestured to let him in. The guard hesitated again. Sir, we can't just... Do as I say. Hale cut him off. Arthur crossed the threshold like a man re-entering a room he had once built. Rows of aircraft hung above, silver and still. He walked slowly, letting his eyes trace each wing and tail like old signatures. The noise behind him faded, the humiliation, too, in its place. A silence thick with recognition. At the center stood a Spitfire with a plaque that read, Unknown Pilot. Arthur stopped. The air seemed to lean in. His fingers twitched, half a salute, half a memory. He whispered a call sign under his breath. Echo 7. The colonel heard it. His brows lifted, disbelief crawling up his face. He turned to an assistant. Get the sortie logs. Squadron 9, 1945. The assistant blinked, unsure, but obeyed. Arthur moved closer to the Spitfire, speaking low, almost to himself. It wasn't meant to come back. That flight. We were meant to draw the fire, not return it. Hale heard. The lines on his face deepened. He knew the story, or thought he did. Records had said the pilot was killed in action, aircraft lost over the channel, but the man standing before him was very much alive, the insignia genuine, the manner unmistakable. You're saying you flew that mission? Hale asked, voice barely holding its shape. Arthur nodded once. The word yes would have been too easy. The assistant returned with a folder wrapped in twine. Hale laid it on a table, untied it, and turned the brittle pages. Here, sortie code, Echo 7. Lost at 1942 hours. Crew, Blythe. Arthur. Status. Missing presumed killed. He looked up. That's impossible. Arthur smiled faintly. It was possible enough to live quietly. He tapped the photo paper with a finger that still bore the shape of a flight ring. You listed me among the dead. Saved you some paperwork. The colonel didn't answer. His throat worked as he searched the next page. It contained a picture, a young man beside a bomber crew, faces tired but proud. The name beneath, Flight Lieutenant Arthur Blythe. The handwriting trembled, but the proof did not. The guard stepped forward. Color drained from his face. I didn't know. Sir, Arthur looked at him. You did your job. Son, I did mine. Both of us still standing. The line carried no bitterness, just a strange mercy that made the young man's eyes drop. Visitors gathered again, drawn by curiosity and the gravity of silence. Arthur's voice steadied as he spoke to no one and everyone. We flew low that night, too low to come back clean. I saw them all go down, one by one. The last thing I heard was their laughter in my headset. Hale pressed a palm flat on the logbook, grounding himself in the here and now. Where did you go after? Arthur? He looked toward the exit, not the questioner. Home wasn't there anymore. I walked until the noise stopped. The colonel watched him. Knowing this was no ordinary visitor and no ordinary day, he turned to the assistant again. Find the restricted file, the one marked classified. Squadron 9. The assistant's expression changed. That file isn't for public release. Hale's voice hardened. It is now. Arthur said nothing, but his eyes closed for a breath, as though something long locked inside had just been given permission to surface. The air around them changed, not colder, not warmer, just alive with unfinished truth. The folder arrived, heavy with dust and consequence. Hale broke the seal, and the room seemed to hold itself still. Arthur stared at it, unmoving, as if the next page might decide whether a forgotten man would finally be seen. And before the paper turned, before history rewrote its line, the colonel asked softly, Arthur, what really happened up there? Arthur's lips moved, but the answer waited, balanced between silence and revelation. The folder lay open like a wound that had been waiting to breathe. Colonel Hale turned the first page with a care that felt ceremonial. The paper was yellowed, corners soft, the ink faded but still obedient. Arthur stood motionless. The light caught the side of his face, mapping the years that history had tried to erase. Inside were orders signed with names now carved in stone. Operation Lantern, a covert run, supply drop, civilian zone marked non-combatant priority. Hale read each word under his breath, piecing the fragments together as if decoding a confession. Arthur spoke, voice low but precise. We were told to strike the ridge, but the map was wrong. There were villages below. The colonel looked up, eyes narrowing. You altered the course. Arthur nodded. The others stayed on target. I broke formation. A sound passed through the group, half gasp, half disbelief. The guard, now silent at the back, watched as the shape of the insult he'd thrown earlier came back to him like shrapnel. Hale leaned closer, resting a hand on the file. That's desertion. Arthur, you know what that meant in 45. Arthur's reply came with no defense. I do. He didn't look ashamed, only tired in a way that comes from carrying silence longer than orders. We flew to save lives that day, not to finish them. The colonel turned another sheet. The report stopped mid-sentence. No closure, no record of discipline. Court-martial, nothing. Someone had buried it clean. Twist surfaced. This was no missing pilot. It was an erased one. Hale's voice lowered to a whisper, meant for truth. Not audience. Who told you to change course? Arthur's mouth curved faintly. No one. That's why I could live with it. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth, tears uninvited. Another man muttered that he would have done the same. The story. Once, still. Now breathed through the room, as though the air itself had joined the ranks. Arthur reached into his satchel. From it he drew a small, dented notebook, the kind issued to pilots for coordinates. He opened to a page that had been folded over decades ago. Numbers, hand-scribbled, blurred by sweat. Hale read them aloud, then froze. They matched the location of a known civilian rescue. Those villagers. He whispered. That was you, Arthur said softly. They were under fire. I could see the flare. So you broke the line. I broke nothing that mattered. Colonel, I just aimed lower. The words hung there, plain and devastating. Hale's composure fractured for a moment. He saw not mutiny, but mercy misfiled. He gestured for the assistant to record everything anew, the official version. He said, "Missed the human one, twist main." Hale discovered the reason Arthur disappeared, not shame, but command silence. The mission had been reclassified to protect political ground. He was ordered to vanish so the war could stay clean. That truth hit harder than any crash. The colonel stepped back, hand over his mouth, as if steadying against a tide of disbelief. "They buried you so they could keep the story simple." Arthur smiled faintly, almost kind. Simple stories travel farther. Hale looked at him with something between guilt and awe. "You saved those people." "Arthur, you were the only one who came back," the old man replied. "Coming back isn't always the same as returning." There was a pause long enough for regret to build a home in everyone's chest. Visitors stood still, the usual museum hush replaced by reverence. The guard took off his cap. It felt like an apology that required no words. Arthur closed the notebook and set it atop the file. "Don't rewrite it for me," he said quietly. "Just write it right." Hale met his gaze. Maybe for the first time, he saw what real command looked like, obedience to conscience. The colonel called for the curator. "We'll reopen this exhibit. Add a name, a face." The curator hesitated, eyes darting to the administrative clerk. "We'll need approval, then get it." Hale answered, "History has waited long enough." The assistant scribbled notes, fingers shaking, as if afraid the words might escape before being pinned to paper. Arthur watched them work. There was no pride, only a calm release. He had lived long enough to see truth unsealed, and that was enough. But before the air could settle, another twist surfaced. Hale found one final document, an unsigned memo. It stated that the pilot of Echo 7 had acted against command, yet prevented a civilian massacre. The memo ended with a single line: "Mission acknowledged. Identity withheld by order." Hale read it aloud, voice breaking mid-line. He looked at Arthur. "You were never meant to be found," Arthur replied. "Some things aren't lost. Colonel, they're just waiting for someone brave enough to look again." The colonel's hand trembled as he reached for Arthur's cap. "May I?" Arthur nodded. Hale adjusted the badge with a soldier's precision. The gesture small yet profound. Respect had changed hands without ceremony. The museum lights dimmed as closing hour approached. Visitors began to leave. Glancing back at the two men beside the open file, the hum of footsteps faded, but the weight of revelation stayed. Arthur looked at the Spitfire once more, the plaque still reading, "Unknown pilot." He touched the rope line, eyes distant, voice calm. "You should leave it that way for tonight. Let them wonder one more day." Hale nodded, understanding that some recognition must arrive slowly to be believed. Arthur turned towards the door, but Hale called after him. "Where will you go now?" Arthur paused. "Somewhere quiet, where names don't matter much." And with that, he left the hall, each step light, as if history itself had loosened its grip. Hale watched him vanish into the corridor's dim glow. He closed the folder, set it beneath his arm, and whispered a promise meant for no audience. "Tomorrow, we put his name where it should have always been." The next morning, the museum doors opened before the clock allowed it. Colonel Hale stood in his uniform, the folder under his arm, its corners pressed flat as if discipline alone could contain what it carried. Beside him waited the guard, shoulders squared now, not out of duty, but apology. The restoration team had cleared the space beneath the Spitfire. The plaque lay on a table, its brass cold and blank, waiting for a name. Hale read the prepared inscription once more. "Flight Lieutenant Arthur Blythe, Operation Lantern, Courage in Silence." He nodded, the words steady, but his throat betrayed him when he said them aloud. Arthur was not there yet. He had said he might come, though no one believed he would. Then, quietly, the door opened. He entered without hurry, the same steady walk, the same cap with its faded badge that now drew respect rather than laughter. Every worker stopped. Even the hum of lights seemed to hold its breath. Arthur looked up at the aircraft, its metal gleam restored, its history finally allowed to exist. He set his satchel on the floor and stood before the empty space where the plaque would hang. Hale approached, voice low but clear. "You were right, Arthur. It should be written right, not rewritten." Arthur smiled. "You've done enough, Colonel." But Hale shook his head. "Not yet. You gave this museum its soul back. We only kept its bones." He signaled the team. The plaque was lifted, fixed beneath the wings that had once carried his name into silence. The sound of the final screw tightening echoed across the hall. No ceremony, no anthem. Just the honest click of metal meeting metal, the sound of history being corrected. Arthur stepped closer, eyes scanning the letters. He traced his name with one finger. The gesture was not pride, but confirmation, like checking an old compass before flight. Behind him, visitors began to gather. Some were from yesterday, others had heard. A small boy held his father's hand and asked who the man was. The father answered softly, a pilot who broke orders to do what was right. Arthur turned slightly, enough to hear it, and gave the faintest nod. Hale saw it too, the way dignity could exist without speech. A reporter from the local paper approached. "Pen ready. Mr. Blythe, could we have a statement, something for the record?" Arthur thought for a long moment. Then he said, "Let the record speak for itself." The reporter lowered the pen, sensing that some words are not meant to be captured twice. Hale dismissed the crowd gently, allowing the hall to thin until only a few remained. The guard lingered, unsure whether to leave or salute. Arthur noticed him. "You did what you thought was right yesterday. So did I. Once." The young man swallowed, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, sir." Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't be. You reminded me the gate still stands." That simple line carried more weight than any apology. The guard straightened, eyes wet, and saluted properly this time. Hale watched, feeling something close to redemption spread through the quiet. He opened the folder one last time, removed the original report that had declared Arthur dead, and tore it clean down the middle. Paper fragments drifted into a bin, soft as ash. Arthur looked on, unblinking. There was no satisfaction in it, only release. He said, "They won't all remember. That's all right. Not all memory needs a monument." Hale replied, "Maybe not, but some deserve one, even if it arrives late." Twist final. Hale revealed that one of the rescued villagers had written every year to the Air Ministry, thanking the unknown pilot. He produced a letter from the file, the paper thin, the ink still strong. Arthur recognized the name signed at the bottom, the child from the village, now an old man himself. He read the line aloud. "Because of you, my children saw peace. You may be forgotten by record, but not by the living." Arthur's voice faltered, the letter trembling slightly in his grip. He handed it back, whispering, "Then that's enough record for me." A silence followed that needed no fill. Hale stood beside him, both men facing the plane as if standing watch together again. Visitors passed quietly behind them, each step respectful, each breath part of a shared confession. Arthur adjusted his cap and turned to leave. Hale spoke one last time. "If you ever wish to tell it yourself, the museum will be here." Arthur paused at the doorway. "Some stories tell themselves, Colonel. The rest just need listeners." He stepped into the corridor. The sound of his shoes faded, replaced by the distant hum of a passing aircraft outside, modern, bright, alive. The colonel looked up instinctively, eyes following its path through the skylight. For a moment, he could almost see a shadow of another Spitfire flying beside it. He whispered, as if to both, "History forgets, But the sky remembers, and the sound of the engines became an answer, rolling through the rafters like applause no one had planned. Later that day, the museum opened its doors to the public once more. Visitors stopped beneath the Spitfire, reading the new plaque, tracing the name as if learning it by heart. Some took photos, others simply stood still, listening to something they could not quite name. Outside, on a bench near the gates, Arthur sat for a while. The guard joined him quietly. Holding 2 cups of tea, Arthur accepted one. They drank without words, 2 men at ease in the silence that only understanding can make. When Arthur finally rose to leave, he placed his cap on the bench for a moment. The badge caught the light, its threads bright again for the first time in decades. He picked it up, straightened the brim, and walked away, light on his feet, unburdened, above him. A single aircraft passed overhead, its shadow gliding across the ground like a salute. Arthur looked up, eyes clear, and though no one heard him, his lips moved in rhythm with the old call sign. Echo 7. The sound of engines faded. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of names, of memory, of the quiet courage that asks for nothing but to be known at last. Some stories don't need medals. They just need to be told, once, and told right. If this story reached you, remember, somewhere, there's another Arthur waiting behind a quiet gate, carrying a piece of history that never made the books. You can keep their memory alive, not by applause, but by attention. Share their story, pass it on, because silence only wins when we stop listening. Quiet heroes, for the ones history forgot, but the sky never did.